show on
Going? Sorry. I'm
today.
recording us now.
I know most of you, although not everybody. I'm Bradley Ellingboe. This is my wife Karen next to me, and oh, and Ashley just left the screen, but Ashley is the assistant for Coro Lux, and she is the one who is hosting this um, Zoom call. And I think people may come in and out, but this was speaking of in and out, there's a rear end of a cat. Uh, there, the particular reason to get together tonight was so you could meet Tony Silvestri, Charles Anthony Silvestri, who is our librettist and playwright for this. And I'll give you three things in background, and we'll kind of turn it over. A few years ago now, COVID interrupted all of this. It occurred to me
behind the brown truck
it occurred to me
right
that,
there.
I wonder if we should ask if people could be mute until they have questions, in case, as Ashley said, somebody sneezes and suddenly they take over the screen. But and also Ashley's going to monitor the chat. Ashley, can you wave? I was introducing you and you were not on the picture.
I'm
And
sorry, I got a charger, so I'm all juiced up now.
Great. You'll meet Ashley in New York. Anyhow, a couple of years ago, it really started to bother me that the degradation of the environment, and I wanted to create some kind of a piece that would help in this regard. But instead of lecturing or, the singing of some kind of musical recitation of statistics about the ozone layer, I approached Tony, whom I had not met before, and asked if he would be interested in this project. And I was very gratified that he said yes, because I knew him already by reputation. Perhaps you saw in my email yesterday that he has worked with Eric Whitaker and Dan Forrest and Voces 8 and the Turtle Creek Gay Men's Chorus, and I can't remember all of the Kim Andre Arneson, all of the credits, and he has crafted all of this language that then I have set to music. And I'm sad to say I don't think we will see Tony in New York, but he offered this chance to get together with him and to be able to ask questions about the process or just anything of your heart's desire, Tony or me, or even Ashley, with regard to practical questions. And we were thinking this would last 30 to 45 minutes. Let's see how things unfold. But with that, I turn it over to Tony Silvestri.
Thanks, Brad, and good to see everybody. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity. I've been to the DCINY events in New York before, and they're really wonderful. And it just didn't work out this time that I could be there. Part of the problem is I'm a university professor, and I would have to cancel classes, and that's toward the end of the semester, and it would be really difficult for me to do that. Plus, I teach history. And so my department chair is very understanding and forgiving when I miss every once in a while, but it's not for history, it's for my side gig. And so I kind of hate to cancel classes as much for the choir stuff. But I've been really blessed to have written for so many different composers over the years on so many different wonderful projects. And when Brad approached me about this project, I mean, I too have wanted to say something about global warming, about human complacency and the problems of profit industry and things like that in this whole conversation. But again, I think Bradley was really right to say not in a preachy way, because nobody wants to go to that concert. And so we had some conversations about how to approach this project. And I think it hit me like a flash. And I don't remember, Brad, how early it was in the conversation that we had, but the idea of our town, and just to sort of invent a place, a mythical American town, and follow this this town over the course of a long period of time. And we discussed that idea on and off in various contexts for a long time before we sort of settled on this idea of an every town. And so I started thinking about, what would this town look like? And I live in Lawrence, Kansas. I don't know if you're familiar with Lawrence, but it's a cute little college town in the middle of the country. And we've got brick streets and old Victorian homes and a gazebo in the middle of the park. And it's, it's River City in a lot of respects. And so I was thinking a lot about this town that I live in now. And I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada. And when I visit there now, that town does not bear any resemblance to the town I grew up in. And so there's this idea of change over time and the ability or inability to revisit someone's home from when they were children. The place might be there, but you've changed, with the old saying, you can never dip your foot into the same river twice. That sort of thing. And so we began to talk about the structure of this piece, multi-movements, and will it have soloists and what kind of instrumentation, and just so I know what kind of forces I was working with. And I always begin this commission process whenever I'm writing a bespoke poem for a composer. I want to have long conversations with the composer. I want to really try to understand the sound world that the composer wants to create, the kind of emotional journey that the composer wants the audience to take. And I take copious notes during these conversations, and very often the composers will reveal golden stuff to me. Sometimes words and phrases that make their way into the final text of the poem, but more often just a kind of emotional language that helps inform what I then do. And so I started with the old oak tree movement. That's sort of how I began and ended the process, by anchoring the experience of the town in this one location, the big tree next to the gazebo in the park by the river. Because an old tree might have seen a lot of things, and I imagined this town with indigenous peoples living nearby and maybe enjoying the shade of that tree when it was young, and now there's this big, sort of town grown around it. So it was fun to create these characters and to imagine these streets and put some of my own personal experiences into the texts. Like the description of Poplar Street is pretty familiar to me. Sorry about the cat. It's Bandit, and Bandit does not care about me at all unless I'm on a Zoom, and then he just wants to walk back and forth between me and the camera. So you'll no doubt see him again. Yeah, because cat, right? That's what they do. Yeah. So yeah, I had fun inventing these people, and the man who works at the mill reflecting on his long career, and the perspective of the tree, the bird watcher, just sort of different, looking into this home through different windows and different keyholes to see different aspects of this community and the people that live there from different perspectives. And then, of course, the cataclysm, what brings it about and how they respond to it. So kind of creating a dramatic structure to say the things that we would have wanted to say in a preachy work, but not in a preachy way. I don't know. I think I'd like to think that we succeeded, Bradley, in creating that. I think.
Yeah, I think we're going to find out on April 29th, but I did want to jump in and say, I did grow up in a small town. It had 900 when I was born, and now it has about 3,000. And but this nostalgia, this what's the movie I'm trying to think of with Gregory Peck and To Kill a Mockingbird, the sort of hearkening to a halcyon time before. But what we see as progress when taken to extremes then ends up hurting the natural, it's like the frog in the boiling pot of water, eventually
Right.
say, hey, how did the river start on fire? Well, it didn't just happen in one day. And
Right.
so Tony and I, communed a little about this, and the oak tree, I love this idea that he came up with, where oaks live to be hundreds of years old, and maybe there's some nomadic, uh, Native Americans following the buffalo past it or something. It's kind of stands there by itself as kind of a marker in the middle of nowhere. And then maybe there's a settlement, and then there's a town, and then there's a city, and that tree is still been there the whole time, and then it burns down. And so we start to care about something that is, what should we say, beyond ourselves, and see it as a symbol of longevity, that it's no one person's fault, but it's collectively all something that we have to deal with. And I want to throw this back to Tony, but I think that's a wonderful, that centers the whole thing.
I think I'd like to think that, yes, the work is about the environment and that sort of thing. But there's also enough universality in it for anybody in the audience to latch on to some part of it and let it resonate with them. I always say to choirs when I have them as a captive audience that choral singers are angels of sorts. They are bearers of messages, and you don't really know what message you're bearing, and you don't know who is the intended recipient of your message, but someone in the audience needs to hear something that is in the program, one of your numbers. There's one line from one piece or one particular stanza from a movement that will remind someone in the audience of their mother, or will jog a memory of something that that they had long subsumed underneath some defensive mechanisms, and it'll bring a catharsis to them. It will have for some the intended effect of changing their behavior or allowing them the courage to advocate for the change of behavior environmentally. But there's all sorts of human connection and human truths written into this text, and frankly, into every text that you sing in every concert. And so if the choir remembers why a choir exists and why the composer wrote this work for choir instead of for string orchestra, it's because you need to focus on the text and what the text says and how the text communicates a human truth. Then you will really move people in the audience. The music opens up the heart of the people in the audience so that the poet's intention can get in. And that's what a choir, and only a choir, can do. That other ensembles simply can't do with the beauty of the music alone. It's the combination of the music and the text that make a choir special, and that makes a piece like this pretty powerful, especially if we can open their hearts to embrace a character or a town in a nostalgic sort of a way, and then present them with the possibility of the destruction of that thing. It can be very powerful if it's approached with that kind of intentionality and that sense of angelic purpose, of messenger purpose. And I know you're all doing that in your ensembles, and I appreciate all the hard work that you're doing to learn these texts, to learn the music, and to communicate the message and tell this story of this town and these people in a vulnerable and authentic and poignant sort of a way.
I heard a quote once that a rabbi said we should have our children memorize the texts, that we think are important, so that then they will be on their heart. And the rabbi was foreign, and somebody in the congregation said, "Don't you mean so they'll be in their heart?" And he said, "No, I mean on their heart, so that someday when their heart is broken, the words will fall in when they need them."
Mm.
Yeah. So tell
I
me,
love that.
you started with the old oak tree, but then the other 9 came from whither?
Yeah, I mean, we had a little conversation about different sort of beats and act 1, act 2, act 3, what sort of things were going to happen, what will be the crisis situation, and when in the piece should it come. These are the sorts of conversations, the structural conversations that we had. I don't remember what I wrote next. I think I went to Poplar Street next. I think I wanted to understand this town. I wanted to populate it with personalities and people. And so I just read it again after a while, and I remember these people. I know who I was writing about and who I was thinking about when I wrote this. A previous neighbor, their name was Larkin, and Randy literally mowed his lawn Chris cut his lawn 3 times a week. It was the most immaculate bonsai'd lawn ever. And that line about, I hope somebody loves me as much as Mr. Larkin loves his lawn. My son actually said that when he was a kid, and I looked at him like, dude, you got humor chops. So that's it, just an example of some of the personal touches. I remember my grandma growing tomatoes and how delicious those homegrown tomatoes tasted, having ripened in that Las Vegas summer sun. So Poplar Street came next, and then I think Birdsong is the one I wrote after that. The last one is the what are you calling it? The Mill Movement 4, the one for solo.
Yeah, I think so. I can't remember what I called it either.
I look through my notes. I make a folder for every piece that I'm commissioned to do, and I write my poetry always on loose leaf paper with pencil, and I keep all of the drafts and all of the notes, because I never know when I need to go back to previous material. If when I write on the computer, I tend to edit as I go, and so older versions of my thinking are all obliterated when I write on a screen. And I want to have raw material in case the composer says, "Hey, this needs to be longer." I'll maybe resurrect a stanza that I had cut for various reasons, or bring back an idea of something. And so I keep all of that for archive purposes. And then in the folder goes the contract and the program from the premiere and all that kind of stuff. And it just gets filed. And so I'm glad I keep all that stuff, so I can sort of reconstruct the order of my thinking. And I remember all the drafts that I had, they all leave out movement 4 until the very, very end. And so
And I tell you, I looked it up and I call it "I wonder." So maybe there's
I wonder. Okay.
Yeah.
And I like the voice of that man. And I wrote it as a prose poem, almost thinking about it as a narration. And I can't wait to hear the piece. I can't wait to hear what Bradley did with all of these movements, but that one in particular, just because the text is so personal, it's so character driven.
Right.
One of the things I thought was, do I put in things like "over yonder" or "I reckon"? How does it, at what point does it become cheesy or caricature-ish? And so I go to that limit, and then I pull back a little bit so that it can be anybody's dad or anybody's grandfather that they remember. that character can embody so many different memories of people in the audience. I didn't want it to be so specific to a particular region or time period. So does this occur in the 50s? Does it occur in the 30s? Does it occur in 1998 or 2023? It can be all of those times that this town exists in a kind of nether world of timelessness.
Yeah, in my mind's eye, it is now, and I'm not sure if we've communicated about this. Well, we talked in Cincinnati a couple of months ago that that we're not going to wear tuxedos and black gowns, but rather we'll come out and have a sort of a town meeting, and the plan has been that people will dress like it's 2023, not like it's one of those what was that photographer's name, Dorothy something in the Depression, but because if it happened 100 years ago, well, that's somebody else's problem, and
right
I think it's our problem.
Yeah, that's wise. I think if the characters, the singers represent contemporary people that could be anyone in the audience in any town. And we don't have to look too far to see the effect of all of this. And we can see fires in the West, and we can see mudslides and drought conditions and tornadoes in towns that have never had tornadoes before. And we certainly don't have to go too far. We don't have to imagine what it would be like to have a devastating climactic event in your community. I just hope we don't wait till it's too late to do something about it.
Time being what it is, I wonder, now you and I have kind of held forth, and hopefully that's been of interest to people in the creative process. But I wonder if people have specific questions, particularly of Tony, because I'll get to see all of you in New York, but we won't get to see Dr. Silvestri there.
Tony, I have a question for you. I'm really curious how you, as a historian, became a librettist. What was your path?
It was luck, really. And I've told this story a lot, and I love telling it. When I was in graduate school, getting my PhD, I was at USC in Los Angeles, and I was studying ancient and medieval history, and I got as far as my qualifying exams. And I needed a break. I needed to study for my quals. I needed to get a start on my dissertation. I didn't want to be in the distractions of LA. I had also run out of money. And so I moved home to Las Vegas to live with my parents for a year. And I had sung in choir all my college years. I went to Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles, and I sang with Paul Salamunovich for years and years and years. And as you all know, you can't not be in choir. It's not possible. You have to be in the choir. And so when I came back to Las Vegas, I went to UNLV, the university there, and I approached the director, a guy by the name of Dave Weiler, really great guy. And I introduced myself, and I said, I'm here for a year, and I just like to be in one of your choirs. Can I audition and I'll just register for the one class or whatever. So he heard me sing, and he got a sense of my experience, and he put me in their chamber singers. And I was seated on the riser right next to a young Eric Whitaker, who was an undergrad in Las Vegas at the time. And he had never written a single word, a single note of music. And we just became really good friends. We became brotherly best friends just right off the bat. It was one of those amazing sort of destined friendships. And that was the year when he began to explore his harmonic language. He would get a few of us together in the stairwell of the music building, and he would each give us a note to sing so that he could hear what chords would do. This was the very, very beginning of the creation of this cluster chord sound that he's now, infamous for. And I remember premiering the first work that he ever wrote, a piece called Go Lovely Rose. I was in the little pickup choir. We were reading off of his manuscript He would give us a new page every rehearsal, and as it took shape. And over the years, we've just been really good friends, and I've been honored to see the growth and development of his career as a musician, as a composer. And then that was in 1991. And later in 2000, 2001, Eric and I taught briefly at the same school. He was a choir director, and I was a high school history teacher at this private school in Los Angeles. And his career had already started by then. He had written Water Night and Cloudburst and a couple of other pieces. And there was beginning to be a kind of a buzz about his career. And I was so proud of him. And then he had this now infamous problem where he had set Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods and never did receive permission or even ask for permission. He figured, oh, Robert Frost is dead, so I can use the poem. And they premiered it. Concordia College recorded the thing. And then the Frost estate contacted Eric and said, well, you never got permission, and so you can't publish the work and you can't perform it ever again. And the piece was dead. And he came to me and he said, would you do me a favor? And I said, well, sure, what? Would you write a new poem that replaces Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening and makes it sound as if my piece was written to your poem instead of the Robert Frost poem? And I mean, I wasn't a poet. I'm a historian. I don't know what I'm doing. And I did it as a favor for him. So Sleep was the first poem I ever wrote. It was the first thing that I ever did. And that same year, I wrote Luxorumque for him, and also Leonardo Dreams of His Flying Machine. These were fun projects that I was doing with my friend. I didn't know that what was happening was I was beginning a career as a lyric poet. And when they performed Leonardo at an ACDA national, I don't know, Bradley, if you were there in San Antonio, and people just lost their minds. Nobody'd ever heard anything like that before. And Eric's career just went, pow. And then other composers started contacting me. I think it was Ola Yelo that contacted me next and said, oh, so do you write for composers? And I said, I guess I do. And so I wrote for him, and then Dan Forrest, and then it snowballed. And now I've written for over 100 composers for over 20 years now. And it's just been one amazing mountaintop experience after another. All just because I said yes to a friend who needed me to stretch my boundaries of creativity a little bit. So the lesson there is when your friend says, hey, let's collaborate on a cool project, just say yes, because you never know what journey you're going to begin at that point. That's the very long answer to your question.
No, it's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where I first learned your name on Sleep. Right. And I heard that, well, it's not apocryphal, but that sort of legendary story now, like, oh yeah, I probably should have asked. That poem is still under copyright. Whoops.
As an interesting epilogue to that story, Stopping by Woods has now passed into public domain.
Right.
And Henry Holt, the estate, contacted Eric again just a couple of years ago and said, you can publish it now. And he's like, no, thanks.
No, thanks. Don't need it. Yeah.
So I know some choirs perform it with the original text now, but that's not Eric's intention. And he's said many times that he's not interested in publishing it with the original text now that he can. He just doesn't want to. So I'm honored by that.
Very interesting. Yeah, you should be.
Other questions? Bonnie, come off of mute.
Can you hear me okay? Yep.
Yeah, now we can.
Mr. Work. Well, so I've been working on some parts of Poplar Street, and I thought this is a great chance to find out how you perceive it. The part where we sing, we were all so proud, and this neighbor's son is going off to war. And then we sing, he never came home. I think, are we angry? Are we miffed? Are we incredibly sad? How do you perceive that? is it okay to ask about a particular line? And then I just.
Yeah, no, it is. And I guess if I were narrating that line, it would be sort of wistful and nostalgic that we loved that guy and, he never came home. And it's a shared moment between the narrator and the listener. It's like, oh, we know what happened. That war was awful. And a lot of us lost our sons and boyfriends and best friends and brothers. And it becomes this sort of shared trauma. But I think, how is that set, Bradley? Is it choral?
That was my perception. It's He Never Came Home is the top of a seventh chord that is unresolved.
So
And,
it's multiple singers singing that.
Yes, when the soloist brings it up and then everybody agrees with her. Yeah, he never came home.
I think, Bonnie, to answer your question,
Not declamatory.
I think each of you in the chorus is going to connect with that line in a different way. And for you, it might be anger. For someone else, it might be nostalgia. For someone else, it might be grief or sorrow or wonder. Wow, I've never experienced that. I don't know. I mean, we're blessed as a nation to not have had a war on our soil in a long time. And many of us grew up without, I was too young to even understand the Vietnam War. And so it doesn't matter how you approach it, but if you approach it authentically to you, then the collective energy that will go across the stage to the audience in Carnegie Hall will be electrifying. It will be authentic. It will be powerful. So if that's a line that you connect with and you have a particular interpretation, don't sing treble forte if it says triple piano. You have to do what the composer intends for you to do. But if, as you hold your folder or you hold your person and sing those lines, sing them with the intensity of the emotion that you have, whether it's grief or sorrow or anger or confusion, futility,
right.
Nostalgia, whatever it might be.
And maybe I could add that, especially in a case of a living poet and bespoke poem, but it's always been my intention that my job is, if these words are worth setting, then I want to make them as understandable as possible to the listener and put a frame around this beautiful painting so that the frame doesn't distract but rather enhances the original thing. And all that being said, maybe this is a little glimpse behind the curtain to say that I had to have my take on, this is how I understood Tony's poem. And then so I found rhythms and chords and solos and not solos and so forth to try and say, this is how I interpret what he just said.
It's a very strange kind of collaborative art where each of us do our thing in a bubble in a cone of solitude, right? So I write the poem and then I hand the poem to the composer, but then the composer needs to write themselves onto the poem. And there are often interpretations that I discover in my own writing when I hear the composer's setting. There are layers of depth and meaning that I didn't intend or that I didn't even know were there. It's one of those things where the Holy Spirit just writes it for you, and I don't know the depths that are there until somebody else interacts with it. There's a great scene, I don't want to compare myself to this in any way, but what just came to me, there's a great scene in a Doctor Who episode where he goes back and gets Vincent van Gogh and brings him to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam or wherever it is. And he lets Van Gogh hear a tour of this Van Gogh painting. And of course, Van Gogh was tortured and he thought that nobody understood his stuff. But then to hear how another person perceived his art was profoundly moving for him. It's one of my favorite episodes and scenes ever in that whole series. And that kind of is what I think happens when an artist creates something. You send it off in the world to fly with its own wings, and then it interacts with people in the way that it does. And so the composer has their say, or if it's a story that gets illustrated, and I've had some of my poems illustrated in children's books, and the illustrator often tells a story that was not my intention. There's a whole nother layer to the illustrated version. And then the singer, the director, has their interpretation. And then by the time all of that gets communicated to the audience, they're going to take in what they're going to take in based on their sets of biases and preconceived notions and what their needs and vulnerabilities are in that moment. And so it's wonderfully and frustratingly ephemeral and unpin downable, even from the very beginning of an intentional process. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about art of all kinds, is that it's not static, and you can't guarantee what anybody's experience of it is going to be. But I've been pretty lucky. I write text for really good composers. And as a poet, I'm so lucky that people experience my writing always with custom-made soundtracks. And we know the power of a soundtrack in a film. Watch a film with the soundtrack removed, and it's a boring nothing. You really need the emotional language of the music. And so Maya Angelou doesn't get that, Robert Frost doesn't get that, Shakespeare doesn't get that, but everybody reads my poetry only exists as lyrics to choral works. So whenever anybody is interacting with my writing, they've got this extra creative mind attached to what I do. And I just think that's a really wonderful blessing to me as a writer.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Rhiannon?
Other questions? Oh, Rhiannon?
Yes. Sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
I thought I had it right. I just wanted to take a quick second because Tony, it's so nice to see you again. I sang with The Sacred Veil with Matt like last month, I think it was.